We know a lot about what is 2 miles and 3 miles down. It isn't being shared with the public, but our government and probably other governments know quite a bit.
Antarctica is one of the most isolated places on Earth, a continent where temperatures drop so low that survival itself becomes a challenge. For most of human history, it has existed at the edge of the world's attention, remote, frozen, and seemingly empty. But recently, Moulton Howe, an Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist known for documenting extraordinary accounts from military personnel, scientists, and government insiders, has brought Antarctica back into focus in a way that challenges everything conventional understanding tells us about this place. According to the testimonies she has spent decades collecting, Antarctica may not be as empty or lifeless as it appears.
Brian, when did you get into the Navy and how did you get to Antarctica?
I enlisted in July of 1976. In order to go to Antarctica, you have to volunteer. It's not a duty station where you are ordered to go. I was able to get orders to Antarctica Development Squadron 6, which was referred to as VXE-6.
So what has been hidden beneath the ice all this time? The first witness Antarctica was first sighted in 1820 by Russian explorers. At that time, people saw only what the surface showed: endless ice, brutal winds, and a landscape too dangerous for ordinary travel. For many years, no one tried to go deep inside. It remained a blank space on maps. Quiet, untouched. By the late 20th century, that changed. Countries began sending missions. Aircraft started crossing the frozen interior. Research stations were established at the edges of the continent. And in 1982, one of those missions would produce a testimony that would stay buried for nearly 2 decades. A U.S. Navy flight engineer took part in what began as a routine supply run. The flight departed from McMurdo Station and headed toward a remote research camp deep inside Antarctica. The crew followed standard procedures. The weather was harsh, but expected. Then something went wrong. An equipment problem forced the aircraft to make an unplanned landing on a ridge. Strong winds pushed against the plane. The temperature outside was extreme. Exposed skin could freeze in seconds. The crew focused on the problem and worked to fix it fast. But while the others were occupied, the flight engineer looked out across the ridge. He noticed shapes in the distance that did not fit the landscape. Clean lines, sharp angles, perfect symmetry. Ice does not form that way. Snow does not create straight edges or smooth, flat surfaces. He moved closer. What he saw stopped him completely. Part of a massive structure stood exposed where wind had stripped away layers of ice over time. The surface was solid and deliberately shaped. It did not look like rock. It did not look like ice. It looked like something constructed with intention. Before he could go further, his radio crackled with a command to return immediately. The crew left without delay. When they landed, intelligence officers were waiting. The crew was separated and questioned individually. Flight logs were collected and marked classified. Non-disclosure agreements were signed. Then came a single clear instruction. This never happened. The flight engineer kept his word for nearly 20 years. He stayed silent. Time passed, and his life moved on. Then, in 1998, after retiring and entering his 70s, he made a decision. He would speak before it was too late. He reached out to Moulton Howe, an American investigative journalist and Emmy award-winning television producer with a reputation for carefully documenting eyewitness accounts that sat outside mainstream discussion. She had spent decades listening to people with extraordinary stories and preserving their testimony in precise detail. She listened to the flight engineer carefully and recorded everything he said. He described the mission, the unplanned landing, and the structure he had seen. He provided the location, the flight path, and details about the crew. Linda checked his service record and confirmed his background. Everything matched. She knew the story sounded extraordinary, but the facts behind it were real. Still, she waited. She believed one witness alone could not carry something this significant. She placed his testimony carefully aside and kept it private. At that point, she had no way of knowing this was only the beginning. The strange pattern. After the flight engineer spoke in 1998, Linda did not go public. She continued her work quietly and kept everything she had heard to herself. Then something unexpected began to happen. Over the next 20 years, more people started contacting her. They came from different countries, different branches of service, and different periods of time. None of them knew each other. None of them had spoken publicly before. But every single one of them described something that pointed in the same direction. A geophysicist told Linda he had worked on ice-penetrating radar surveys in Antarctica. During one mission, the readings beneath the ice showed something that made his team stop. Not small gaps or natural cracks. Large, empty spaces at significant depth. The shapes were regular and organized, not the random formations of natural caves. He reported the data to his supervisor. Then the data was classified. Within hours, it had disappeared from the system. His entire team was reassigned, and no one was permitted to discuss it again. Another witness came from a Navy construction battalion. He described a mission that took his team miles from any known research station. They received no normal scientific briefing. They were given one instruction: drill straight down. When they reached the bottom of the shaft, he saw walls that looked metallic and smooth. The surfaces were too precise to be natural. He stood there and understood that someone had built it. A scientist from Argentina's Esperanza base also contacted Linda. He explained that his team occasionally pulled objects from ice cores more than 12,000 years old. The objects did not look natural, but every time something unusual appeared, military personnel arrived quickly, took the samples, and left no record behind. No reports, no documentation, nothing. A pilot shared another detail. While flying across Antarctica, he noticed a restricted area that appeared on no official maps. Civilian flights could not enter it. Even military pilots required special clearance to approach. When he asked what was there, a superior gave him 2 words: sensitive research, then told him to stop asking. Linda laid all these accounts side by side and studied them. These people had never met. They had no connection to each other. Yet their stories built toward the same conclusion. Something large, structured, and deliberately concealed existed beneath the Antarctic ice. She felt both the pull of discovery and the weight of it. Because if the pattern was real, it meant something had been kept hidden for a very long time. She still needed stronger evidence. And then, in 2016, a source contacted her who would change everything she thought she knew. The buried structures. In 2016, Linda Moulton Howe received a message from a retired NORAD officer with classified clearance. He told her he had worked on an Antarctic operation in the early 2000s. Linda would later describe him as the most credible source she had ever interviewed across her entire career. What he told her was precise and detailed. Beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, at a depth of approximately 2 miles, there were structures that did not belong to nature. Not rock formations, not ice. Built forms shaped with clear design and deliberate precision. And then he told her something even more significant. These structures were older than the ice above them. They predated the last ice age. That meant they were created more than 12,000 years ago, at a time when Antarctica was not frozen, when it was a land with rivers and forests. That single detail changed the scale of everything. He told her that these anomalies were first detected during Operation High Jump in 1946 and 1947, led by Admiral Richard Byrd. Official reports described the mission as focused on training and research, but classified data told a different story. Seismic surveys had picked up unusual signals deep beneath the ice, signals that matched no known geological structure. Officials recorded them and disclosed nothing to the public. Over the following 70 years, multiple nations continued investigating these locations. The United States, Russia, and later China all carried out operations in Antarctica that were not treated as ordinary scientific research. They were treated as recovery operations. Teams were not simply studying these sites. They were attempting to extract materials and objects from them. Some areas were accessed through natural ice caves. In others, teams drilled shafts to reach deeper levels. These were not isolated objects or small structures. They appeared to be parts of a larger connected system, something that resembled a buried city beneath the ice. Some of the recovered objects were functional. Researchers did not understand and how they operated, but testing confirmed they still worked. These items were transferred to classified facilities for further study. Linda pressed for documentation. The retired officer provided coordinates and internal documents with redacted sections. The papers showed project names linked directly to those locations. For Linda, this was the moment the pieces locked together. The story was no longer a collection of separate, unusual events. It was a single connected picture, and it was far larger than she had imagined. What they found below. After learning about the buried structures, Linda turned her attention to what teams had actually encountered when they went inside. A military contractor contacted her with a direct account. In 2003, he had worked on a classified drilling operation in the West Antarctic interior. His team was given minimal information before departure. They were told they were accessing a geological anomaly. Nothing more was explained. No scientific context, no mission briefing, just a location and an instruction. The descent stayed with him. They dropped through a shaft cut into the Antarctic ice, walls of white and blue, frozen patterns surrounding them as they went deeper. The light from above shrank to a narrow circle, then a faint glow, then nothing. Only their equipment lights showed the way. Then the ice stopped, not gradually, suddenly, as if someone had drawn a boundary and the natural world had respected it. He stepped off the platform and found himself standing in a large open space. It was not a natural cave. Natural caves follow the random geometry of water and pressure and time. This space did not. The dimensions were deliberate. The proportions felt considered. The walls carried markings, symbols arranged in patterns that matched no known writing system, not ancient Sumerian, not Egyptian hieroglyphics, not any script in the historical record. They ran across large sections of wall in organized rows, clearly structured, clearly meaningful, and completely unreadable. Then he noticed something ahead. A doorway, not a crack or a gap in the ice. A deliberately shaped entrance leading deeper inside. He was not permitted to pass through. His clearance level did not extend to what lay beyond that point. He stood and watched as scientists and military officials made their final preparations to enter. Equipment checked, procedures followed with the precision of people who had been here before. Before any of them returned with what they had found, his involvement in the mission was terminated. He was brought back to the surface, processed out, and never briefed on what happened next. Before he died, he told Linda one thing directly. People should know we found something down there that changes history. Other witnesses filled in what surrounded that statement. A satellite imagery analyst told Linda he had seen unusual shapes in Antarctic image data before processing, geometric outlines partially visible beneath ice. straight edges running for distances no natural formation could sustain. By the time those images passed through the distribution pipeline, the relevant sections had been handled, parts blurred, others removed entirely. He told Linda this was not a one-time occurrence. It was a procedure repeated across multiple image cycles from the same geographic areas. A material scientist who briefly studied samples recovered from Antarctic operations ran standard composition testing and compared results against every known database. The outcome was the same every time. No match. The materials corresponded to nothing in any existing geological or scientific record. Their composition and structural properties had no relationship to any naturally occurring substance on Earth. In his professional experience, that result was essentially impossible for something formed naturally. A logistics coordinator with the NSF Antarctic program saw equipment lists for certain operations that had no place in scientific research: heavy excavation tools, sealed transport containers with unusual handling specifications, and routing documentation connected directly to Department of Defense logistics networks rather than standard NSF channels. Something significant was being moved in and out of Antarctica, and considerable effort had been made to keep that movement invisible. Then, there was the detail that appeared across multiple testimonies from people who had never spoken to each other. Electronic equipment failed near certain specific locations, compasses behaved erratically, navigation systems produced readings that did not match actual position, communication devices lost function at the same coordinates again and again, then recovered after leaving the area. The pattern was too precise and too consistent to be ordinary interference. It kept returning to the same geographic points, the same coordinates that appeared in the structural accounts, the imagery reports, and the logistics documentation. Linda laid all of it together: the flight engineer, the geophysicist, the Navy construction worker, the NORAD officer, the contractor who stood before an unreadable doorway beneath 2 miles of ice, the imagery analyst, the material scientist, the logistics coordinator. The pilot turned away from airspace that appeared on no official map. None of them had ever spoken to each other. None had coordinated their accounts. And yet the details pointed in the same direction, with a consistency that could not be explained by coincidence. Something was down there. Something built before the last ice age. Something that had been found, entered, and studied under the strictest classification. Something that multiple nations had treated not as a scientific curiosity, but as a matter of the highest strategic importance. And something that, for all the years Linda had been collecting these accounts, the world above the ice still knew almost nothing about: the decision to speak. By 2020, Linda Moulton Howe had gathered more than 15 credible testimonies. She had verified coordinates and matched specific details across multiple independent sources. The accounts came from military personnel, scientists, contractors, and officers who had worked in Antarctica across different decades. They had not compared notes. They had not coordinated their stories. But the details aligned. Then the people who had trusted her began to die. One by one, the witnesses she had protected for years passed away. In 2022, the retired NORAD officer, the one she had called the most credible source she had ever interviewed, died. Linda understood what that meant. She had become the last person holding all of these accounts together. If she waited longer, the testimonies would disappear with her. Everything these men had trusted her to preserve would be gone. In a 2023 interview, she spoke openly about that moment. "I realized that if I didn't tell this story completely, with all the details and all the sources I could responsibly name, then it would die. These men trusted me. I have a responsibility to make sure their testimonies survive." That decision changed everything. In late 2023, she began assembling what she called a comprehensive Antarctic report. Every testimony, every set of coordinates, every operation detail, and every piece of supporting evidence gathered across more than 25 years of investigation. In early 2024, she began releasing parts of the report through earthfiles.com. She published the coordinates witnesses had identified. She shared declassified Operation High Jump documents from 1946 and 1947, including redacted sections. And she made one direct request to the public: check the evidence yourselves. The response from governments was exactly what she had come to expect over the years. No denials, no confirmations, no explanations, only silence. To Linda, that silence was itself an answer. It confirmed what her witnesses had been telling her for more than 2 decades. Something had been found beneath the Antarctic ice, something old enough to predate the last ice age, something built with a precision that no natural process could produce, something that multiple nations had quietly been studying, extracting from, and carefully keeping away from public knowledge. Whether that silence ever breaks is a question that remains open. But the testimonies exist. The coordinates exist. The documents exist. And the witnesses who carried this knowledge through decades of secrecy trusted one person to make sure it survived. She made sure it did. This story is a reminder that truth does not always surface easily. There may still be things hidden in this world waiting to be understood. If this raised questions for you, share your thoughts below and subscribe to follow what comes next.